I didn't cheat because I stopped loving my husband. I cheated because I stopped loving who I became with him. That's the truth I never admitted out loud. Not to my therapist, not even to myself really, until now. I didn't fall for another man because I wanted sex, or drama, or passion. I fell because I was disappearing, quietly, without protest, like a picture slowly fading under the sun. My name is Elena. I'm 42. I live in Santa Barbara. I have a beautiful house with a lemon tree in the backyard, a 10-year-old daughter with dimples like mine, a husband who never yells, never cheats, never drinks too much. On paper, I'm one of the lucky ones. Scratch that. I was one of the lucky ones. And that's what makes it so hard to explain why I did what I did. Daniel, my husband, is a good man. I need to say that first. He is dependable, responsible, kind. He gets up early to make Ava's lunch. He drives carefully, pays bills on time, always remembers to change the HVAC filter before I even think about it. People say we're a great team. But being part of a team isn't the same as being loved. And feeling safe isn't the same as feeling seen. In the beginning, Daniel and I had fire. We met in grad school. I was studying literature. He was in an MBA program. And I thought he was the most grounded man I'd ever met. He made me feel anchored, like I didn't have to float through life wondering what was real. He was solid. I was the wild one. He steadied me, and I made him laugh. We fit. But the thing they don't tell you is that sometimes the things that stabilize you at 28 can suffocate you at 42. After Ava was born, I stopped working full-time. I freelance now. Copywriting mostly. Brand strategy when it pays well. It gives me the flexibility to be home, and I told myself that mattered. But slowly, without me noticing, I started shrinking inside my own life. I stopped reading for pleasure. I stopped writing anything just for myself. I stopped listening to jazz in the afternoons. My world became pickup schedules, meal plans, homework help, groceries, PTA meetings, birthday party RSVPs, and Target runs. I wasn't unhappy, just erased. Daniel started coming home later. Not because he was out partying, because he works in finance, and those meetings run over. He'd come in tired, polite, distracted. He'd kiss my cheek, ask what we were watching tonight, scroll through his phone during dinner. We still had sex, maybe twice a month. It was fine, serviceable, efficient, like brushing teeth before bed. Something you do because you're supposed to, not because you crave it. I tried to talk to him about it once. I told him I missed us, that I didn't feel connected anymore. He looked confused, genuinely confused. "We're good though, right?" he asked. "I mean, everything's okay?" And I said yes, because what else was I going to say? No. Everything is not okay. I'm vanishing in front of you, and you don't even notice. I felt like a ghost in my own kitchen, wiping crumbs, paying bills, folding tiny socks. A domestic haunting. And then one night, it started. A message. A name I hadn't seen in 2 decades. Micah. We went to college together. He was an architecture major, intense in that artistic, soft-eyed way. He wore linen in the fall and had calluses on his hands from building models by hand. I used to watch him from across the quad and wonder what it would be like to be in his head. We weren't close. We had one class together. We flirted once at a party, kissed once when we were both drunk and 20. And then life swept us apart. So when I saw his name pop up on Instagram, a friend request out of nowhere, it felt like hearing a song you forgot you loved. I clicked accept. 5 minutes later, I had a DM. Didn't expect to see you here. You still write like your bones are on fire? I stared at it for a long time. I could have ignored it. I could have closed the app, closed the door, closed that entire part of myself. But I didn't. I typed back, only when no one's watching. And in that moment, that tiny harmless moment, a door opened. Not to infidelity. Not yet. To possibility. To memory. To hunger. To the woman I used to be, whispering from behind the laundry pile, I'm still here. Don't forget me. I didn't answer Micah again that night. I closed the app and told myself I was being ridiculous, that it was just nostalgia, the same way you feel when you hear a song from senior year and suddenly remember the smell of someone's sweatshirt. I went to bed next to Daniel. He was already asleep, mouth slightly open, one arm curled around his pillow like a child. And I stared at the ceiling, awake for hours, heart beating, like I'd just done something wrong. Next morning, there was another message. I read one of your old pieces from the campus journal. It still hits. I laughed out loud. Not because it was funny, because it felt like someone had reached across time and touched a part of me no one had spoken to in years. I didn't even know that piece still existed online. I replied, "You really went digging for that, huh?" He answered immediately. "You don't forget voices like yours." And just like that, we were talking. Not flirting. Not yet. Just catching up. He was divorced. Amicably, according to him. No kids. Still working in architecture. Now based in Portland. He'd been back in California a few times recently for projects and had a few more trips coming up. I told him I still lived here. Still writing, kind of. We joked about professors we hated, the ratty student bar with the sticky floors, the insane weather swings in Santa Barbara. It was all very innocent. Until it wasn't. Looking back, I think I knew from the second message that this was dangerous. That this man remembered me not as the mom in leggings version of myself, but as the fiery, moody, ambitious girl who once read Neruda out loud in a campus cafe. And I wanted to be that girl again, desperately. I started checking my phone constantly. I'd draft replies and delete them, worried I sounded too eager. I'd reread our conversations at night, smiling in the dark like a teenager. Meanwhile, Daniel would lie beside me, snoring softly, or scrolling through home improvement articles before passing out. Micah made me feel visible. Not in a sexual way, not yet. In a spiritual one. Like he could see all the layers beneath the performance I lived every day. He remembered my sarcasm, my tangents, the way I used to overanalyze everything. And instead of being annoyed by it, like Daniel often was, he liked it. He asked for it. "You always had that low-key rage under the surface," he messaged once. "I used to wonder if you were going to become a professor or burn down a system. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry at that. I wanted to be both. I felt like both. Things at home stayed fine. Daniel was still Daniel. Helpful, responsible, predictable. We talked about whether Ava should take piano lessons. He ordered new curtain rods for the guest room. I made salmon with lemon dill sauce on Tuesday, like always. And meanwhile, in my phone, another life was unfolding. Micah sent me photos, not sexy ones, but deeply personal. A snapshot of his sketchbook, a blurry sunset on a work site, a coffee stain on his floor with a caption that read, "Looks like a sleeping cat. Can't bring myself to clean it." I sent him voice notes. Silly things, like my rant about the PTA moms organizing a 5K for charity, when none of us had time to even shower. He told me I sounded the same. Wiser, he said. But same rhythm. You always had this rhythm in how you speak. It was like a friendship, but with a pulse underneath it. Like we were walking a tightrope, stretched over something forbidden and raw. One night, Daniel and I had sex. It was routine. The kind where you kiss, he touches your shoulder, you turn out the light. I didn't fake it. I just floated above it. Thought about whether I had responded to Micah's last message, whether he would notice if I disappeared for a day. Afterward, lying there in the dark, Daniel said, "You've been in a better mood lately." I almost laughed. Instead, I whispered, "Yeah, I guess I have." And I hated myself a little for it. The first time Micah suggested seeing each other, I felt my stomach drop. "If I'm in Santa Barbara in a few weeks," he wrote, "any chance we grab a coffee?" I stared at the message for 10 minutes. Then I typed, "Maybe." He replied, "I'll take maybe. You were always careful with your yeses." He was right. 3 weeks later, I said yes. The day Micah came to Santa Barbara, I spent an embarrassing amount of time getting dressed. I changed 4 times, tried on 2 different pairs of jeans, ended up in a soft black blouse I hadn't worn in years because the neckline felt too low for school pickup. I curled my hair slightly, just a wave, not enough for Daniel to notice, but enough to feel like someone else, or maybe like myself, 100 years ago. I told Daniel I was meeting an old college friend for coffee. I didn't lie. I just omitted the part where that friend had been talking to me every day for 6 weeks and knew the shape of my loneliness better than my own husband. Micah chose a small place downtown, not too trendy, not too busy. I arrived early, of course, sat by the window, picking at a blueberry muffin I didn't even want. My heart pounded like I was about to do something criminal. Maybe I was. When he walked in, my breath caught. He looked older, obviously. His curls were shorter now, threaded with silver. He had faint smile lines, a small scar on his chin I didn't remember. But his eyes, they were the same. That deep brown, almost black, like they held old secrets. And when he smiled at me, I felt something shift in my chest, like a frozen pipe finally cracking open. He hugged me, just a normal hug, but my whole body reacted like I'd been struck. It had been so long since anyone touched me with warmth instead of habit. We sat. We talked. It should have been awkward, but it wasn't. We laughed about college, the weird roommate I had the night he broke a sink trying to install mood lighting in the dorm. He asked about Ava. I told him stories that made me sound like the kind of mom I wish I was all the time. We talked about work, writing, creativity. He still sketched every day. I told him I hadn't written anything personal in years. "Why not?" he asked gently. I shrugged. Life got in the way. He looked at me for a long second, not in a judgmental way, just like he was trying to see the answer I didn't give. "Then maybe life is too loud," he said. That stayed with me. We didn't touch again. No kiss, no dramatic hand brushes across the table. But the tension was there, humming under the surface, like a held breath. When we parted, he said, "I'll let you decide what happens next." And I hated him for giving me that power, because I already knew what I was going to do. Not right away, but eventually. The texts didn't slow down after that. If anything, they deepened. Less catching up, more confessions. I told him I didn't know who I was anymore outside of being Ava's mom and Daniel's wife. I told him I felt like I'd faded from color to grayscale. He didn't tell me I was overreacting. He said, "I think you're just remembering what it feels like to want." One night, Micah sent me a voice note, just 30 seconds. "Can I tell you something? I think I used to be a little in love with you. I didn't know what to do with it at 20. But now, I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been so afraid of you." I must have listened to it 10 times, just sitting on the kitchen floor, knees pulled to my chest, while the dishwasher hummed behind me and the dog barked at nothing outside. That night, Daniel tried to initiate sex again. I said I was tired, which was true. I was tired of pretending. The second time I saw Micah was a month later. Daniel was in San Diego for a work event. Ava was at her friend's house for a sleepover. I told myself it would just be coffee again. Just two friends catching up. But I wore perfume. I shaved my legs. And when I got to his hotel, not a seedy place, not romantic, just a clean business class suite near the waterfront, I didn't even try to pretend anymore. He opened the door. We didn't say a word. He stepped aside. I walked in. And when he kissed me, slow, reverent, almost like he was asking permission with every breath, I kissed him back. It wasn't fast. It wasn't frantic. It wasn't about sex. Not at first. It was about being touched by someone who looked at me like I was something holy. Like I still had mystery left in me. Afterward, we lay there, tangled in silence, and I cried. Not because I regretted it, but because I didn't. Micah stroked my back and didn't say a word. He knew. He understood what that moment cost me. He didn't try to justify it or label it. He just held me and let me fall apart. The next morning, I woke up in Micah's hotel bed with sunlight streaming across my bare shoulder and guilt curled like smoke in my throat. He was already up, shirtless, standing by the window with a cup of coffee in his hand. The sight of him, calm, half-lit, skin kissed by morning light, felt unreal, like a scene from a film I didn't belong in. I wrapped the sheet around me and sat up slowly, feeling both young and ancient all at once. "Hey," he said softly, turning. "You okay?" I nodded, even though I didn't know if it was true. He came back to the bed and sat beside me, not touching me, just close. "You don't have to say anything." I didn't. Not at first. I just looked at him. Really looked, and whispered, "This doesn't mean I know what I'm doing." He gave a small smile. Neither do I. We didn't make love again that morning. It wasn't a movie. There was no montage of us dancing barefoot or giggling under the sheets. He just sat, shared toast and silence, and looked at each other like people who had crossed a line they couldn't uncross and weren't entirely sorry about it. I left around 9:30, drove home with the windows down, even though the air was cold. I didn't cry. I didn't play music. I just let the wind batter my face, as if that might erase what I'd done. When I walked through the front door, the house smelled like lemon and wood. Everything was tidy. The couch blanket folded. Ava's school papers stacked neatly. A basket of clean laundry at the foot of the stairs waiting for me. My life, my real life, sat there, unmoved, unchanged. And I felt like a stranger in it. That night, Daniel came home from San Diego with a souvenir coffee mug and a tight hug that I didn't deserve. He told me I looked rested. I told him I'd had a quiet weekend. We watched a documentary in bed and fell asleep before it finished. It was as if nothing had happened. But everything had. The next few weeks were a blur. Micah and I texted, carefully. We didn't talk about the night, not in detail. We didn't plan a next time, but we didn't say it was over either. It just hung there, a thread between us, quiet, taut, dangerous. I told myself it was a one-time thing, that I just needed to feel something, that now that I had, I could go back to my life and try harder, love Daniel better, be a better mom, be more present, that this was the wake-up call I needed. But the thing about fire is, once it finds oxygen, it doesn't shrink. It grows. Micah came back 2 months later. This time, he didn't even book a hotel. He stayed in a rental apartment by the beach. He sent me the address with no caption, just an open door, and I walked through it. We saw each other 4 times that week, always in the daytime, always during errands or while Ava was at school, where Daniel was working late. I became a master of excuses, hair appointments, client meetings, helping a friend move. It scared me how good I became at lying. Micah and I didn't talk about the future. We didn't fantasize about running away together. We didn't pretend this was anything more than what it was. 2 people filling a hole. We never said I love you, but sometimes in the way he kissed me, I felt like he was saying it anyway. One afternoon, as I sat on his couch, wrapped in one of his sweaters, he asked, "Do you ever feel like you're 2 people at once?" I nodded. All the time. The woman everyone sees, and the one I try to keep quiet. He looked at me for a long moment and said, "I only ever see the real one." It broke me a little, how much I needed that. At home, I started looking at Daniel differently. Not with resentment, not even with guilt, just distance. I noticed how he never asked me how I really felt, how our conversations had become logistical. Groceries, dentist appointments, Ava's science project. I noticed how he hugged me with one arm, like he was already somewhere else. I noticed that when I told him I'd had a good day, he never asked why. I used to think Daniel and I were just in a rut, that every long-term marriage settled into this kind of companionable numbness. But now I wasn't so sure. Was this just what marriage looked like after 12 years? Or had we both stopped trying so long ago, we couldn't even see the edges of what we'd lost? One night, lying in bed, I watched Daniel sleep. His face was peaceful, familiar. The man I built a life with, the father of my child. And I felt like I was looking at an old photograph, something I used to love, framed and fading. That week, I wrote a short story. The first real piece of writing I'd done in years. It poured out of me in 2 sittings, about a woman who falls in love with a memory, about the ache of invisibility, about the betrayal of silence. I didn't show it to Micah. I didn't show it to anyone. But for the first time in years, I felt like I'd opened a window inside myself. I knew this couldn't last. Affairs never do. But I also knew I wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. Spring came early that year. The air got warmer, the sun hung around longer, and the jacaranda trees lining our street began to bloom in bursts of purple. Everything outside looked alive, full of renewal and softness, and I felt like I was splitting in 2. On the surface, nothing had changed. I still picked up Ava from school every day, still brought gluten-free snacks to soccer games, still kissed Daniel on the cheek when he left for work, still watered the ferns in the hallway every Thursday morning. But inside, I was spiraling. Micah and I weren't together in any real-world sense. There were weeks we didn't see each other. Sometimes we didn't talk for days. He never pressured, never demanded. It wasn't like that. But he lived in my body now, in my bloodstream, in the way I caught myself staring out the window while the kettle boiled, aching for something I couldn't name. Every moment I spent with him made me feel more awake. Every moment I spent without him made me feel more hollow. One afternoon, while I was standing in line at the pharmacy, I got a text from him. "I had a dream about you last night. You were standing in the ocean, waist deep, fully dressed, holding your shoes in one hand and a burning letter in the other." I stared at the message, heart thudding in my chest. "What did it mean?" I wrote back. "You tell me." That was Micah, always handing me the mirror, never letting me hide. That night, Daniel and I argued for the first time in months. It started over something stupid. I'd forgotten to reschedule Ava's dental appointment. He snapped at me, not cruelly, just sharply, and I snapped back. Then suddenly, we were both standing in the kitchen, exhausted and brittle, saying things we didn't mean. "You're distracted all the time," he said. "You don't even look at me anymore." I laughed, but it came out bitter. "Maybe because when I do, you're looking at your phone." That landed. He looked at me for the first time in what felt like weeks. "What's going on with you, Elena?" I opened my mouth, closed it, swallowed. "Nothing," I said, "just tired." He didn't believe me, but he let it go. That night, we lay in bed back to back. The silence between us felt heavy, almost suffocating. I thought about what Micah had said once, that I built a life where I disappeared too well, that sometimes people forget to look for what's quietly fading. The next morning, I woke up before everyone. I sat on the patio in my robe, sipping coffee and staring at the lemon tree. I tried to imagine never seeing Micah again. I couldn't, and that terrified me. Because this wasn't just about sex anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. It was about identity, about memory, about desire, not just for a person, but for the person I used to be. Micah made me feel like that version of Elena was still alive. That I wasn't just a function, wife, mom, scheduler, cleaner, cook, but a woman with thoughts, edges, secrets. And that feeling was addictive. But every time I touched that high, I crashed even harder into the guilt. Ava started asking questions. Little things. Why are you always texting during dinner? Who's Micah? I heard you say his name. Why do you look sad when no one's talking? Kids know. Even when they don't understand, they feel the crack in the wall. I started pulling away from Micah, not dramatically, no big goodbye, just less. Shorter replies, longer pauses, one-word answers. It hurt. I could feel the space growing between us like a tight wire being slowly snipped. He didn't chase me. He just sent one final message. I hope you choose what keeps you alive, even if it's not me. I cried for an hour after that, on the bathroom floor, with the door locked and the fan on so Ava wouldn't hear. I wanted to be strong, wanted to be good, wanted to do the right thing. But no one ever tells you what the right thing looks like when your heart belongs to two different versions of yourself. A week later, Daniel surprised me. We were cleaning out the garage, something we'd put off for months. Among the boxes of baby clothes and camping gear we never used, I found a tote labeled E, Grad School. Inside were old notebooks, printouts of my poetry, a thumb drive I thought I'd lost. Daniel picked up one of the journals, flicked through it, and smiled. "You were so intense," he said, handing it to me. "You used to stay up until 2 a.m. writing by candlelight. I remember thinking, this woman's going to set the world on fire." I laughed, a hollow sound. "Yeah, that woman burned out." He paused, looking at me differently. "I don't think she's gone. She just got quiet." It hit me like a punch. Not because it was kind, but because it was true, and because it was too late for that version of him to show up. After Daniel found that journal, something shifted between us. Not dramatically, not overnight, but I felt it, like a door opening halfway. He started asking more questions about my writing, about my moods. He offered to take Ava for a whole Saturday so I could have time to myself. He even brought home a secondhand desk and set it up in the guest room. "For your writing," he said almost shyly. And for a moment, just a moment, I thought maybe it's not too late. Maybe I could choose this life, the one I built, the one with history, roots, a child I love more than breath. Maybe the door with Micah didn't need to be the one I walked through. So I tried. I tried hard. I wrote 3 essays in 2 weeks. One of them I submitted to a small literary magazine. I got back into cooking, real meals, not just functional ones. I took Ava hiking on Sundays. I stopped texting Micah. I even deleted our thread. But he lived in my head like muscle memory. And one afternoon, walking home from the market, I saw a man with his walk, that loose-shouldered glide, and I had to sit on a bench and breathe through it. You don't just cut off someone who saw the most intimate parts of you and loved you for them. Still, I kept trying. Daniel noticed. He was warmer, laughed more. We started having sex again, not out of duty, but out of some timid, rediscovered desire. It wasn't like it had been with Micah. There was no ache, no fire, but it was real, human, almost tender. I told myself I could live with that not every love story had to be an inferno, that maybe real love was quieter, enduring. And then came the email. I hadn't heard from Micah in over a month. I figured he moved on, met someone else, deleted me from his life as easily as I'd tried to delete him from mine. But there it was, on a Tuesday morning, buried between a newsletter from Ava's school and a Target promo. Subject: no pressure. Just something I wanted to say. I clicked it before I could stop myself. Elena, I'm not writing to get you back. I'm writing because I've meant it when I said I hope you choose what keeps you alive. But I also realized I never told you something important. I loved you. I do. Not in a wild, possessive way. I love the way your mind works. The way you read between every line. The way you walk with your head down, like you're trying to stay invisible, even though you shine more than anyone in the room. I'll never forget what it felt like to be allowed into your world, even if just for a little while. You don't owe me anything. Just know that somewhere out there, someone saw you, all of you, and didn't look away. Micah, I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I cried, silently, hunched over my laptop, tears fallen between the keys like tiny, guilty drops of truth. That night, I was quiet at dinner. Daniel noticed. You okay? I nodded, just tired. It had become our script. After Ava went to bed, I sat outside under the patio light and reread the email. I didn't respond. I couldn't. But the ache was back, and this time it came with clarity. Micah had never asked me to leave Daniel, never made promises. He'd only ever given me one thing: attention. Real, full, undivided attention. And I hadn't realized how starved I'd been for it until he showed me what it felt like. I started dreaming about him. Not sex dreams. Dreams where we were just talking, laughing, sitting in a bookstore cafe, reading passages to each other, walking along the coast, not touching, just being. It hurt more than any fantasy because it felt possible. And yet, impossible at the same time. I tried to pour all of it into my writing. The ache, the guilt, the desire. I wrote pages and pages I couldn't show anyone. Stories of women torn in half. Of marriages that looked perfect from the outside and were hollow inside. Of men who arrived too late and lit fires anyway. One of the pieces got accepted. A small journal, a personal essay titled "When the Map Doesn't Match the Terrain." Daniel read it and told me it was really deep. He meant it as a compliment, but he didn't understand. He thought it was fiction. It wasn't. And that gap between what I wrote and what he read felt like everything that was wrong between us. Still, I kept going. I kept choosing the life I had. Ava needed stability. Daniel was trying. I owed them that, didn't I? But the more I repressed, the more brittle I became. One evening, I snapped at Ava for something tiny. She spilled orange juice on the couch, and her face crumpled like I'd struck her. I went to my room and cried harder than I had in years. What was I doing? I wasn't the woman I wanted to be. Not with Daniel, not with Micah, not with Ava, not even alone. I was stuck between identities. Wife, mother, ghost, flame. And I didn't know how to choose one without killing the others. That night, I wrote Micah back. Only one sentence. I'm still here. He didn't reply right away, but I knew he would. Because some threads don't break, they just wait. Micah's reply came 2 days later. It wasn't long, just 3 words. So am I. No punctuation, no follow-up, no pressure. But those 3 words burned hotter than anything he'd ever sent me. Because they meant I hadn't imagined it. The pull, the intimacy, the unspoken language between us. It had been real. It still was. I stared at that message for hours. I didn't reply. What could I say? I had no plan, no intention, no idea what I wanted anymore, only that I couldn't go on pretending I was fine. That weekend, Daniel's parents came to visit. We cleaned the house, made up the guest bed, bought fresh flowers for the dining table. I played the good hostess, smiled, passed wine, asked about their cruise. On Sunday, after they left, Daniel and I sat in the kitchen cleaning up. He poured me another glass of wine and said, "You've seemed more like yourself lately." I looked at him. Myself? Yeah, I don't know. More engaged. You're writing again. You're laughing more. It's nice. And that's when I realized something terrifying. He didn't know why I was laughing more. He didn't want to know. He was just happy I wasn't distant. He didn't ask what had changed inside me, because he didn't want to disturb whatever fragile piece we'd managed to reconstruct. He was content with the surface. And suddenly, I wasn't. I wanted to scream. Ask me the real question, Daniel. Ask me why I'm glowing again. Ask me why I'm restless. Ask me if I'm in love with someone else. But I stayed quiet, took a sip of wine, changed the subject. Later that night, I messaged Micah again. Sometimes I feel like I'm holding a beautiful lie in one hand and a safe truth in the other, and I can't bear to choose either. He responded, "What if neither is the whole truth?" That line stayed in my head for days. What if the lie was that I was whole with him? What if the lie was also that I was safe with Daniel? What if the truth was somewhere in between, that I was fractured no matter who I chose? Micah came to town again in late April. I told Daniel I had a writing retreat. Technically, that wasn't a lie. I did rent a cabin to write. I just didn't say who else would be there. Micah met me at a quiet rental in Ojai, a 2-bedroom adobe cottage, surrounded by oak trees and wild lavender. It was the kind of place where the air feels still, like it's listening to your thoughts. We didn't touch it first. We cooked together, drank wine, sat on the floor reading each other things we'd written. He told me a story about his father. I cried. I told him about Ava's birth. He cried. We were 2 adults, not sneaking, not rushing, not hiding, just being. The second night, he asked, "What happens if you never leave him?" I looked at the fire for a long time before answering. Then I become someone I don't recognize. He nodded, said nothing. But later, in bed, he held me like he knew he would lose me. And I think, in that moment, We both understood. Love doesn't always win. Sometimes it just shows you what's been missing. On the last day, we said goodbye quietly. No drama, no false promises. "I won't message you again," he said, fingers laced in mine. "Unless you ask me to." I nodded, because anything more would have broken me. The drive home was quiet. I didn't play music. I didn't cry. I just thought about Ava, about Daniel, about the life I'd built and the one I'd nearly torn apart, and about the version of me that had finally woken up, even if it was only for a few months. When I got home, Ava ran into my arms. She smelled like shampoo and peanut butter. I held her longer than usual. Daniel asked how the retreat went. I told him it was intense, that I needed a day to decompress. He kissed my forehead. "I'm proud of you," he said. "You seem lighter." And I wanted to scream, "You don't even know me," but I didn't. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan turning in slow, lazy circles. Micah was gone. But the woman I'd found with him, she was still here. And I knew, deep in my bones, that I couldn't go back to sleep. For the next 2 weeks, I lived in limbo. Not dramatic, stormy limbo. No screening, no slammed doors. Just the quiet, aching kind. The kind where you wake up every morning and wonder who you are before your feet even touch the ground. I went through the motions like I was made of paper. I packed Ava's lunch. I answered emails. I smiled at Daniel when he handed me coffee. I even met up with the other moms for yoga and herbal tea, laughing at the small talk, nodding at complaints about husbands and screen time limits. But inside, I was suspended, still carrying the echo of Micah's touch, his words, the way he once looked at me, like I was a question he wanted to spend his life answering. He kept his word. He didn't message me, and I didn't ask him to, not because I didn't want to. God, I did. My fingers hovered over my phone screen more times than I can count. But I knew if I reached out again, I wouldn't be able to stop. And something inside me, something maternal, something moral, something old and exhausted, told me it was time to make a choice. Not between two men. Between two versions of myself. The one who stayed and worked and mothered and managed and smiled through her teeth, and the one who remembered desire. Not just sexual desire, but the desire to live, to feel, to create, to want more than survival. That week, I went to the guest room, the one Daniel had turned into a writing space for me, and I locked the door. I lit a candle. I sat down with my laptop and forced myself to write the truth. Not a story, not a poem, just the truth. I wrote it all, from the first message to the last goodbye. The hotel, the rental, the lies, the hurt, the love, the shame, the hunger, the fear. 15 pages. Single-spaced. When I finished, my hands were shaking. I didn't edit, didn't reread. I just saved it, closed the laptop, and wept. That night, I didn't sleep. The next morning, I asked Daniel if we could talk. He looked surprised, not wary, just confused. We'd been okay by all surface accounts. We sat in the living room. Ava was at school. The dog was asleep at our feet, and I told him, not everything, Not every detail, but enough. I told him I'd been unfaithful, that it wasn't random, that it wasn't a fling, that it had already ended, that I hadn't told him before because I didn't know how, because I'd been trying to protect the version of us we'd both been clinging to for too long. I told him I was sorry. Not just for the betrayal, but for all the ways I disappeared without telling him, for all the years I let myself erode and blamed him in silence. When I finished, Daniel sat completely still. No rage, no tears, just silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, steady. Was it him or what he made you feel? I opened my mouth, then closed it. I think both, I said finally, but mostly what he made me remember about myself. He nodded, exhaled, rubbed his hands over his face. Then, after a long pause, "Do you want to leave?" I didn't answer right away because I didn't know. I didn't want to hurt Ava. I didn't want to blow up a stable home. I didn't want to cause a scandal, become that woman whispered about in school pickup lines. I didn't want to lose Daniel's kindness, his steadiness, his history with me. But I also didn't want to go back to sleep. "I don't know," I said, honestly, "but I don't want to keep lying." Daniel nodded again, slowly, and then he cried. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet tears, like a man who was realizing the ground beneath him had already shifted before he even noticed the cracks. We didn't decide anything that day or the next. We took space. We started couples therapy. We agreed to wait before making any final calls, to try and see what was still there, if anything could be rebuilt, not from habit, but from truth. I didn't contact Micah. I wanted to every day, but I knew that no matter how much I loved what we had, he couldn't be part of whatever came next. Not if I wanted to be honest. Not if I wanted a real life built on more than shadows. Instead, I wrote a lot. Not stories, not fiction, just me. Pouring it all onto the page. Page after page of grief and longing and memory and doubt. And slowly, I began to feel real again. Not perfect, not redeemed, but real. Therapy was harder than I expected. Not because it forced us to confront the affair, although that was part of it, but because it made us confront everything before the affair. All the silences, the small betrayals, the subtle forgetting of who we were, both individually and together. Daniel came to la primera sesión con un libro. That broke me a little. The way he'd prepared, the way he still wanted to do it right, even after I'd shattered something sacred between us. Our therapist, a woman named Marla, with kind eyes and steel underneath, didn't start with the cheating. She started with the beginning. "How did you two fall in love?" she asked. And for the first time in years, we told that story together. How we met at a friend's birthday. How I spilled wine on his shirt and he didn't flinch. How he waited with me at a bus stop in the rain, even though he had his car. How we stayed up until 3 a.m., debating whether people could truly change. As we talked, something strange happened. I remembered, not just the facts, the feeling. There was a time I couldn't wait to see Daniel's name on my phone. A time I looked at him and saw possibility, not routine. A time I felt safe and wanted and chosen, all at once. And I saw that he remembered too. But then Marla asked, when did that begin to fade? And everything went quiet. I wanted to say after Ava was born, or after your second promotion, or after my mother died. But the truth was more slippery. The fade wasn't an event. It was a slow, creeping fog. Daniel dijo algo que me sorprendió. I think I started treating our marriage like a contract instead of a connection. I looked at him, really looked, and saw a man who was hurting too. Not just from what I'd done, but from what he hadn't done. He didn't cry in session. I did. A lot. He listened. And for the first time in years, I felt seen by him. After the third session, we went for a walk instead of driving straight home. Just wandered a trail near the bluffs, Ava at a friend's house. He stopped at a lookout and said, "You said he reminded you of who you were. I don't want you to lose that again. Even if I'm not the one who gets to keep you." I couldn't speak. Because what do you say to someone who just let you break their heart and still loves you anyway? We didn't sleep together that night or the next. But something began to soften between us. At home, we were more honest, painfully so. We fought more, but also listened more. We asked real questions and didn't always like the answers. We laughed, sometimes at the absurdity of it all. We made a rule: no pretending. If one of us was checked out, say it. If one of us was numb, admit it. If one of us was hurt, name it. Ava noticed. "You and Dad talk more now," she said one night while brushing her teeth. I smiled. "Yeah, we're trying." She shrugged. "I like it. You look like teammates again." Out of the mouths of babes. I didn't tell Ava about Micah. Maybe one day I will, in a version she can understand. Not now. But I did start writing publicly about infidelity. Not mine, not explicitly, but about the quiet lives of women, about boredom and self-erasure, about how easy it is to become a stranger to yourself. The essays were raw, personal, shaky, but they resonated. One of them went semi-viral. An editor reached out. I started pitching more. It wasn't a career shift, not yet, but it was something mine again. Micah stayed silent. He kept his promise. Once, late one night, I saw his name pop up in my email. Not a message, just a "Micah liked your post" notification on Substack. He was still reading, still watching, still out there. I sat there, staring at the screen, heart thudding like a drum. I didn't reply, didn't reach out. But I closed my laptop gently, with gratitude, for what he gave me, for what I took, for the version of me he helped resuscitate. Daniel and I weren't fixed. We weren't dancing in the kitchen or jetting off on second honeymoons. We were still untangling trust, still healing, still rebuilding something. Not the old marriage, but a new agreement between two people who had finally stopped lying, even to themselves. One night, after Ava went to sleep, Daniel and I sat on the back porch under the string lights. He handed me a beer. I took it, surprised. "You hate beer," I said. He grinned. "I'm learning to try things again." We sat in silence for a while, the night air cool and honest. Then he said, "If we don't make it, I want you to know I still think you're the bravest person I've ever met." Tears filled my eyes. I didn't deserve that kindness. But I held it close anyway, because sometimes even broken love is still love. And sometimes surviving isn't about going back. It's about moving forward, scarred, but awake. It's been 8 months since I told the truth. 8 months since the affair ended. 8 months since I opened that terrifying door between me and Daniel and said, "This is what I've done." Sometimes it feels like 8 years. Other days, like 8 minutes. Ava just turned 11. She's obsessed with sea otters and wants to start a podcast. Last week, she asked me if adults ever get bored of being themselves. I told her yes, but I also told her it passes. Not always, but sometimes. Daniel and I are still in therapy. We go once a week, sometimes together, sometimes separately. It's not easy. There are weeks we barely speak. Weeks we circle the same fight with new words. Weeks we consider letting go. But we haven't. Not yet. What we have now isn't a fairy tale. It's something quieter, rougher, less photogenic, but maybe more honest. We have dinners where we don't talk much. We have Sunday mornings where we take Ava to the farmer's market and share croissants and coffee. We have nights where we touch, not out of obligation, but out of memory, out of some stubborn ember that refuses to die. I still think about Micah. Not daily, not obsessively, but he shows up in certain moments. When I walk past a hardware store that smells like sawdust. When I hear jazz drifting from someone else's car window. When I sit down to write and remember how it felt to be heard, not just listened to. I haven't spoken to him since that email. I've drafted messages. I've hovered over send. I've wondered if he's seeing someone new, if he's finally stopped waiting for the part of me I never gave him. But I always delete the words before they leave my fingers. Not out of fear, out of respect for him. For Daniel. For the woman I am now. The one neither of them fully owns. Because that's the biggest thing I've learned in all of this. You can't outsource your aliveness. No one else can rescue you from the numbness. Not your spouse, not your lover, not even your child. You have to go into the fire of your own life and reclaim something, even if it hurts, even if it costs you everything. I know people will judge me for what I did. They'll say I'm selfish, weak, immoral. And maybe I am. But I also know this. I was drowning in a beautiful, well-decorated cage. And I chose to shatter a window instead of suffocating quietly. It wasn't graceful, but it was real. Now I write almost every day. Not just for money, for me. For the woman I forgot. For the one who never left, just went quiet. I write in coffee shops, in my parked car, in the bathtub, wherever the words come. Some days, I still feel broken. But now I know broken doesn't mean ruined. Sometimes, breaking is just the beginning. A few weeks ago, Daniel and I took Ava to the coast. She wanted to see the tide pools. It was chilly and overcast, the kind of day that smells like salt and nostalgia. Ava ran ahead. shouting facts about sea cucumbers she'd memorized from YouTube. Daniel reached for my hand, and I let him. We didn't speak, just walked. Side by side, no script. No guarantees, just two people trying to meet each other again, not as who we were, but as who we are now. Trying to build something out of the ashes, not to forget the fire, but to honor the burn.